So we have good news for the devotees. Mukunda Maharaj has written that next week he's going to do a special seminar for our class, and he'll send it from Australia, and hopefully by next Sunday we'll be able to hear that, because he was highly instrumental in this period of Prabhupada's developing ISKCON. Today also we'll see the next 20 minutes of the movie that Satsrup Maharaj sent us. And then next week we'll also start incorporating another book by one of Prabhupada's first disciples named Achyutananda Swami. And the name of his book is Blazing Sadhus. So today we'll deal with 3 books. We'll start with the Prabhupada Lilamrita, of course, written by Satsrup Maharaj. And today is a very important day. This is the day that Srila Prabhupada moves into 26 Second Avenue. So we'll get Satsrup Maharaj's presentation, and then Mukunda Goswami, who found 26 Second Avenue for Prabhupada, and then we'll hear Prabhupada's presentation of this special day. Now it was time to move the Swami into his new place. A few friends who were on hand accompanied the Swami over to the Bowery loft. So Prabhupada was not staying in the loft anymore. We heard he was staying at Carl's loft. Now they were returning to the loft, a few of Prabhupada's students. They were going to take all of Prabhupada's things out of the loft and walk. It was a half-hour walk away with all of Prabhupada's things, like a safari. Maybe they weren't prepared to become his surrendered disciples, but contributing toward the first month's rent and volunteering a few hours of work to help set up his place were exactly the kinds of things they could do very willingly. At the loft, they all gathered up portions of the Swami's belongings, and then they started out on foot up Bowery. It was like a safari, a caravan of half a dozen men loaded with Prabhupada's things. Michael carried the heavy Roberts reel-to-reel. So in those days, the tape recorders, the reels were 7 inches big, and the machine was about this big, about 10 kilos. And even the Swami carried 2 suitcases. They did everything so quickly that it wasn't until they were well on their way and Mike's arm began to ache that he realized, why didn't we bring a car? It was the end of June, and a hazy summer sun poured its heat down into the Bowery jungle. Starting and stopping, the strange safari, stretching for over a block, slowly trekked along. Prabhupada struggled with his suitcases, past the seemingly unending row of restaurant supply shops and lamp stores between Grand, Broome, and Spring Streets. Sometimes he paused and rested, setting his suitcases down. He was finally moving from the Bowery. His electrician friend on 72nd Street would have been relieved. You remember that when Prabhupada informed the electrician when he was staying uptown at Dr. Mishra's studio, and then when he had his own little room, the electrician warned Prabhupada that that's the worst part of New York City you're moving to. You feel unsafe here because your place was broken into, but there is far more unsafe at the Bowery. Although perhaps he would have disapproved of the Second Avenue address also, because the Second Avenue is where the hippies lived, where a lot of immigrants lived, also poor people lived, and immigrants. At least he was finished residing on Skid Row. He walked on past the homeless men outside the Salvation Army shelter, past the open-door taverns, stopping at streetlights, standing alongside total strangers, keeping an eye on the progress of his procession of friends who struggled along behind him. The Bowery artists and musicians saw him as highly evolved. They felt that the Spirit was moving him and were eager to help him set up his own place so that he could do his valuable spiritual thing and spread it to others. He was depending on them for help, yet they knew he was on a higher level. He was his own protector, or as he said, God protected him. The Swami and his young friends reached the corner of Bowery and Houston, turned right, and proceeded east. Gazing steadily ahead as he walked, Prabhupada saw the southern end of 2nd Avenue, 1 block away. At 2nd Avenue, he would turn left, walk just 1 block north across 1st Street, and arrive at his new home. So for those who are not aware of New York City, the avenues go up and down, long, long roads. They start over at the East River with alphabet numbers. A Street, B Street, C Street, Tompkins Square, that was in the alphabet area. And then it starts with 1st Street, 2nd Street, Avenue, the avenues. And the streets, they're much closer together, and they make a grid across Manhattan. So it's 1st Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street, all the way up to the hundreds. As he passed the IND subway entrance, the storefront came into view, matchless gifts. He gripped his suitcases and moved ahead. At 2nd Avenue and Houston, he hurried through a break in the rapid traffic. He could see green trees holding their heads above the high courtyard wall, reaching up like overgrown weeds in the space between the front and rear buildings of his new address. Because New York is so overdeveloped with concrete and buildings and asphalt on the roads that it's very rare to see any greenery. They have little pockets of parks here and there, like there's Central Park, which is like the lung of New York, and then little squares like Tompkins Square, St. Mark's Square, different places where people could find some greenery. So fortunately, the matchless gift shop in the front had behind it a little courtyard that wasn't well taken care of. And then behind that was where Prabhupada was going to have his 2 rooms, his apartment. The street side building housed his meeting hall. That's the matchless gift shop. The rear building, the apartment where he would live and translate. Adjoining the storefront building, on its north side, was a massive 9-story warehouse. The storefront structure was only 6 stories and seemed appended, that means just right next to the larger building like its diminutive child. On its southern side, Prabhupada's new temple showed a surface of plain cement and was free of any adjoining structure. There was only the spacious lot of the busy mobile service station. Mobile is just like we have HP and different oil companies here, Indian Oil, now they have Reliance. So Mobile is just one of the brand names of the petrol that they have in America, that bordered on 1st Street. As Prabhupada approached the storefront, he could see 2 small lanterns decorating the narrow doorway. There was no certainty of what awaited him here, but already there had been good signs that these American young people, mad though they sometimes were, could actually take part in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. Perhaps this new address would be the place where he could actually get a footing with his International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So this move was on July 1st. And finally, we have finished chapter 6, which was entitled On the Bowery. And we're going to chapter 7, called Breaking Ground. Now, Mukunda Maharaj, he was personally present in this safari. And we will read his vision of what happened that day. Moving day. It was a warm and sticky Manhattan afternoon when the small crew of the Swami's friends gathered to transport his belongings from Paul's loft to the new storefront. The move to 2nd Avenue resembled a safari. The expedition snaked along the Bowery, avoiding drunks lying on the sidewalk, everyone carrying something. The 70-year-old Swami carried 2 suitcases, one in each hand, as we trudged the mile-long walk to 2nd Avenue. I couldn't imagine how he was managing to carry them. It was so hot, and after his heart attacks on the way to America, this kind of exertion couldn't have been good for him. I was struggling with my own burden, a Roberts 7-inch reel-to-reel tape recorder. One of the regulars at the Swami's evening programs had begun to use the heavy machine to record the lectures in the Bowery. I carried it on my right shoulder, but had to switch it back to the left shoulder and then back again several times. My arm and shoulder were sore for days afterward. When we finally arrived at the storefront, Carl rummaged through his pocket for the key to the front door. The rest of us, sweating and tired, rested our loads on the sidewalk and leaned on parking meters and the store window, trying to catch our breath. Carl held the door open for the Swami. Picking up his 2 suitcases, he stepped into the bare, musty storefront and looked around. The rest of us followed him in, relieved to be out of the heat. Some kicked off their shoes and sat against the walls. Others found seats on the window ledge. I put the tape recorder in the corner so it wouldn't get damaged or kicked, and headed back home, satisfied that I'd done my part in helping the Swami to find his place and move his stuff. Soon after moving into the storefront, the Swami decided to incorporate his fledgling movement. Prabhupada says, "We will call it the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON for short," he said one day. "Why don't you call it the International Society for God Consciousness?" someone suggested. "No," the Swami said, "Krishna Consciousness." A lawyer named Stephen Goldsmith oversaw the proceedings. As part of the process, the Swami drew up a document which he entitled 7 Purposes of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So these 7 principles, the purposes, at the beginning of every Back to Godhead magazine, they're listed. We'll go through them probably next week because this is July 1st. And then finally, on July 6th, the lawyer, Stephen Goldsmith, he comes to the meeting that night on a Friday, and he has the papers with him for everyone to sign. So today we'll just go through from the 1st to the 5th, because the 6th is a very special day, and we'll deal with that particularly a little later. So now we have what Srila Prabhupada says about this day. You see here, July 1st is so full, he even wrote on the sides here. But then once he moved in, there was no time even for writing. He didn't even put his usual sunrise, sunset, nothing. No time, for the rest of the week. And then finally, this is the big day on the 6th, when Stephen Goldsmith comes and the corporation papers are signed by the first 11 trustees. So on July 1st, this is what Prabhupada says. It's a Chaturdasi. Today I entered the new house at 26 2nd Avenue, rear portion, room number B1. For my purpose, it is all good. I do not know why Krishna is trying to establish me in New York. I am his servant's servant, and therefore let his desire be fulfilled through my agency. The landlord, Mr. Gardner, is Paka landlord. He knows how to increase the rent, but I am not sorry. For 2 months, namely July and August, I will have to pay at $62. And odds, he has to pay separately his electricity, his gas. Whereas from September 1st, I will have to pay $71 and odds. Let me see how Krishna arranges the things. Now this first deposit and the first month, Carl and Michael and all of Prabhupada's friends from the Bowery, they put the money together and paid for Srila Prabhupada's rent. They wanted to make sure that he had a place at last. So this is the first day, July 1st, it's a Friday. Those are the days that Prabhupada has his meetings. In the evening, there was meeting in the new store. There was about 8 men, collection $5.50, book collection $4. So instant. Prabhupada didn't waste any time. That night, even after just moving in, he had his first meeting. The whole day I waited for Con Edison, but they did not come. And then Prabhupada's telephone was also installed on that day. So on the 2nd of July, which was the Purnima, today also I phoned to Con Edison. That means the first 2 days, Prabhupada had no electricity. They have promised to come sometimes today. Let me see, what do they do? So now we're very fortunate because Satsrup Maharaj, while he still had the energy, he's suffering from many years, health setbacks. At this point now, he's also suffering from Parkinson's disease. And he can't walk, he's in a wheelchair. So when we asked him to give his memories of this time, he contacted one of his disciples who had made an 1.5-hour movie of Satsrup Maharaj's memories for the 50th anniversary of the incorporation. So last week we saw the first 20 minutes, and now we will go on to the next 20 minutes because after that, after that, there's new subject matters.
It was easy to love Krishna with the Swami. And one way we could show it was through tears. A boy came forward with a wooden bowl and an apple and a knife, and he gave it to the Swamiji. Swami cut the apple in half, in quarters and eighths, and cut up enough so that everyone had a piece of apple. He had the boy give the apple out to everyone, and he took a piece and popped it into his mouth without touching his fingers to his mouth. He ruminated on it, chewed it with his mouth closed, and then turned toward the sink to his right and spit out the pits which landed right in the sink. He was expert at everything. The first boy to come forward and volunteer more service for the Swami was Keith, who later became Kirtanananda. He moved out of his Mott Street apartment and moved in with the Swami. Swami taught him how to cook in a 3-tiered brass boiler, and he became Swami's houseboy and cook. But after a little while, he expanded his cooking and he started using big pots and cooked enough for 15 people. And we started this phenomena of daily lunch with Swamiji. It was extraordinary. Even some of the hangers-on in the storefront who weren't very interested in the philosophy would show up punctually at 1 o'clock every day. Swamiji's apartment had 2 rooms. In one room he worked. There was his tin suitcase, battered from India, on which his little typewriter sat. And he sat on a thin mattress and typed there. And he slept on that mattress. And he used to meet with guests when he didn't have kirtan nights in that room. Then next to it, separated by a window, was another room. This room had wood parquet floors and was bare, except it had a little coffee table at one end. And on that table he had a picture he brought with him from India of the Panchatattva, Lord Chaitanya and his 4 associates. Swamiji would sit there and wave incense to the picture and ring a bell and chant prayers. We didn't know what he was doing, but we came to call it bells. So Kirtanananda, or Keith, brought out the pots and put them on the floor before the table and the picture. And Swamiji led us in a Bengali prayer, and we all bowed down. And then Keith gave out plates and served us all prasadam, as it was called. And there was all hot, good food, rice, vegetables, dal, and big chapatis. Swamiji called them rotis. And he encouraged everyone to eat. He wouldn't let you just sit there and play with your food and not eat. If he saw somebody wasn't eating, he'd call out his name and say, "Eat more, eat more." He wanted us to eat with gusto. And Keith said, "Everyone should take seconds, right, Swamiji?" Swamiji said, "Yes." Swamiji ate the same thing that we ate, except with one extra. He had a little bowl of milk and a banana, and he would slice the banana on the edge of the bowl so the pieces fell in and he would eat them. In my foolishness, I envied the having this extra preparation that we didn't have. But I love the food. I had a terrible diet before coming. I used to eat chocolate donuts and milk and cookies. And that was all I had. And I was skinny. So this was real food and real nourishing. Although it was unusual to me. When I grew up, we never ate rice. My mother thought rice was for poor people and Chinese. But this was delicious, fluffy, white rice. And I loved it. Swamiji ate with his right hand. He used to mix all the food with his hand. He'd rip off a piece of the chapati and mix it in with the rice and the dal and mix the vegetable in. And keep mixing it all with his fingers and then put it in his mouth without touching his lips. So we followed his example and ate with our right hands. Except there were some spoons for new guests. And it was kind of sloppy eating. We got prasadam down our shirts and mouths. I loved so much going to the lunch at 1 o'clock. And it was convenient for me because I got off work at 1 o'clock from the welfare office on 5th Street. And it was only a 5-minute walk to the storefront. But one day my supervisors called over to me, "Mr. Guarino, you're going to have to stay in for lunch today. You have to work on the Garcia case." So I thought, oh no, I can't go to lunch. So I went to the hall where they had a phone, and I put my money in and called the Swami's number. And he answered, "Hello, Swami." I said, "Swami, this is Steve. Do you remember me?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Swami, I can't come for lunch today. I have to stay in for work. Could you save a plate for me? I'll come at 2. He said, "Yes, I will save a plate for you." I thought that was daring of me to call him personally, but I was so anxious to have the prasadam. So I had to stay in an hour, and then I went over to see him. When I went to his door, he was all alone, and everything was cleared up. The rug was rolled back. The wooden floor was exposed, and I sat on the edge of the floor. And he went and he got a plate for me, and he bent over and he put it on the floor. And I thought this was the way you feed a dog. You put a plate on the floor for him. And then for the first time in my life, I bowed down to him. I bowed at his feet. And he said, "Yes, thank you." And I took my prasadam and was very, very happy. It was a wonderful time coming to eat lunch with the Swami. When we finished eating, we all got up and left him to clean up. We didn't have a concept of the Guru and serving the Guru. But after a few weeks, we caught on and started helping him clean up. And the whole idea of service developed. But the lunch was mainly eating. There was one young boy who was a little younger than the other of us, named Stanley, who sat next to Swamiji. Stanley was eccentric. His mother had come to see the Swami and said that he could live in a storefront if the Swami would personally take care of him. The Swami agreed, and he doted on Stanley. So Stanley had a voracious appetite. He was thin and tall, but he ate like anything. And he would ask the Swami, "Can I have another chapati?" Or Swamiji would say to him, "Stanley, would you like another chapati?" And he would say, "Yes, I would like another one." And he kept taking chapatis until he ate 10 chapatis. And then Swamiji would say, "All right, you've had enough." But he could eat that much. So gradually we learned that you're not supposed to leave the Guru to clean up all the prasadam and the pots. And we stayed and helped him. And the whole concept of service developed. That we each had some service to do for the Swami. My service was typing. I was a typist because I was a writer. That was my vocation before I came. And so I could type. And I had a typewriter chained to my radiator in my apartment. So Swamiji had these stacks of manuscripts tied with saffron in his closet, which Hayagriva had edited. And I typed them up after the editing. And he gave me a big stack. I said, "Swamiji, there's enough here to last me all winter." And he laughed and said, "I have enough typing for you for several lifetimes." He showed me all the stacks of manuscripts that he had. And I also gave money from my job. I had $400 savings in the bank. I planned to use it to go to Canada over the summer and do serious writing. But I took the money out of the bank. And one day when Swamiji was alone, I gave it to him. When he received it, he broke into a wide, candid smile of gratitude, and he thanked me. I probably took care of months of rent. I was standing real close to him as I gave him the money, and he smiled to me. And then I walked from standing next to him a few feet to sitting down and leaning against the wall. And in that distance, Swamiji's face changed, and I looked at him, and instead of smiling at him, he was looking at me very sternly, almost like he wasn't pleased with me, and I was shocked. And it was as if he was saying, "You have given your money, but when are you going to surrender to Krishna?" He didn't want me to be puffed up by the fact that I had been a big donor. And other people took on other services. As I said, Hayagriva edited. Umapati took notes on Swamiji's lectures. Gargamuni Greg sold incense. And devotees did different things. The first girl came, Judy Kozlovsky, that she later became initiated as Jadorani. And she was an artist, although she said she was the worst student in her class at college. And she started painting pictures for the Swami from photographs of gurus and Krishna, and he let her work in his worship room. She would paint with oils and tinkle the brush in a little glass of water. So her full-time occupation was to paint canvases of Krishna using a grid system, so it was exactly copied. And then he hung the paintings in the temple room. They were very crude at first, and he laughed at them, but said, "It is all right, you will gain experience by painting." So everyone had their service, and that was a key understanding. On off nights, when there wasn't a lecture in the kirtan other than Monday, Wednesday, and Friday,
This is 61 Second
Swamiji
Avenue, these
sat in
pictures.
his workroom, and he let guests and devotees come in and sit and ask questions, and he would answer questions by the hours and talk about Krishna, and he would talk about his boyhood in Calcutta, and he would range over all topics. It was so nice sitting in there and talking informally. But different street people used to come in who were eccentrics. Once a boy came in and said to Swamiji, "Right now I'm higher than you are. I am God." Swamiji paid his respects to this boy with his hands folded and said, "Please accept my obeisances. Now leave." That's how he treated God. I asked a question. I said, "What about the Western philosophers and writers that we used to read and we were so attached to? Did they have any God consciousness at all?" And he said, "Their sincerity was their God consciousness." I loved that answer. If he had said, "They're useless, they have no God consciousness at all," it would have been harder for me to take because I was so attached to them and loved following them. But that he gave them some credit for their sincerity made it easier for me to take. My first question that I asked him when I found him alone was, "Is there a state of spiritual advancement that you make from which you don't fall down?" And he answered with one word, "Yes." And that made a big impression on me, because I had tried to be good
This is the
and not
ferry
smoke
to
and not
Staten
have illicit
Island.
sex. And I would be able to keep it up for a few weeks, but then I would fall down, and I wondered if it was ever possible to reach a platform where you didn't fall down. So he convinced me by his one word. And actually, since the first night I attended the temple, I stopped smoking marijuana and stopped illicit sex. So his influence was so powerful over me. One day I came from my work wearing my sport jacket and tie and shirt. I came at my lunch hour to buy the books, his 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam. I found him alone with the Mott Street boys and some other boys, and he was talking philosophy as usual. I envied them because they didn't have any jobs. And I asked them, "I'd like to buy the books." Didn't have any job, and I asked him, "I'd like to buy the books." So he got out the books and he gave them to me, and I wanted to show off that I knew about reading books, and I said, "Are these your commentaries on the scriptures?" And he said, "Yes." So I said, "I'll take them." He said, "They're $6 each." I gave him a $20 bill. And he made a gesture to get some change, and I said, "That's all right, you can keep it." And then he looked at me and said in a deep voice, "Sit down." He wanted me to join with the others and listen to him. But I very quickly said, oh, I can't sit down, I'm only on my lunch hour. I have to get back to work. So he wasn't displeased. He looked up at me surprised and a little pleased. He saw that I wasn't a hippie, a good-for-nothing, that I was engaged in work. And he let me leave with a smile. I guess he thought he could engage me. So I read the Bhagavatams, and I found things in there that Swamiji wasn't even lecturing about in the Bhagavad-Gita lectures. I read about the author of the Bhagavatam, Vyasadeva, being despondent despite writing so many Vedic literatures, and his spiritual master came to him and explained the reason why. So that resonated with me because I was a full-time writer, and I was despondent also. So one time I went to see the Swami when he was alone, and I said, I found that really interesting in your Bhagavatam about Vyasadeva being a writer and being despondent. And when I said that, he opened his eyes wide in appreciation that I was asking a question about an advanced topic. So that was the benefit of reading the books. One evening in his room on an off night, when it was crowded with people, he was talking about his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. We loved hearing that he had a spiritual master, and he told us about how he first met him, and how he was a follower of Gandhi and argued with his spiritual master. And we lapped it up. And then he told us a story about his spiritual master. He said when he was a young boy, just a toddler, he once ate a mango without offering it to God. And his father, the great Vaishnava Bhaktivinoda Thakur, scolded him for eating without offering the food. And the little boy said, I will never eat mango again in my life. And although he was just a little boy, he kept that vow for his whole life. When his disciples would offer him mango, he would say, no, I am an offender. And Prabhupada said, we couldn't appreciate this austerity of vow because we didn't know how delicious mangoes were. In India, they were considered the king of fruits. But you can't get any mangoes in America. So after he said that, I was in my office one day thinking about the Swamiji, and I thought about the mangoes, and I wondered if I could get him one. So I went to a grocery store on First Street, and I looked in the front and asked for any mangoes. They said, no, we don't have any, but we have a few in the freezer in the back, special items. So he took me in the back and he showed me some mangoes. They were small, but they were green and red and yellow, and they looked good and ripe. So they were $1 each, which was expensive. But I bought one, and I brought it to the Swami. He was very grateful, and he accepted it from me and thanked me. So that began a habit for me. Every day I bought a mango, and he would accept it. After a few weeks, I came in the afternoon, and I gave him my mango, and there were boys sitting there, unemployed as usual. And Swamiji took the mango and he said to me, very good boy. And he said it the way you would address a 7-year-old boy who was giving an apple to the teacher. So the Mott Street boys burst out laughing, and I blushed and I felt I had been the butt of a joke. Swamiji saw the situation and he said, no, this is love. This is Krishna consciousness. And I felt redeemed. Swamiji said he was going to legally incorporate the society. For months he had referring to it as the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. A man had told him, why don't you call it the International Society for God Consciousness? That's more acceptable to Westerners. And Swamiji said, no, Krishna consciousness. God is a weak, vague term. Krishna is more scientific and accurate. And if people don't know who Krishna is, then it's the duty of the Society for Krishna Consciousness to teach them. And he laughed and said, "We'll call our society ISKCON." But it took money and a lawyer to incorporate a non-tax or a tax-exempt society. His casual follower from the Bowery, Carl Jurgens, had experience incorporating societies, and he had a lawyer. So he told his lawyer, a Jewish man named Steve Goldsmith, about the Swami on the Lower East Side. And he became fascinated with the idea of incorporating his society. So he came down to see the Swami, and he used to attend the lectures and kirtans. He was the only non-hippie in the audience. And he met with the Swami, and he brought his two children to lunch, and they liked the soup or dal. And they discussed together about Prabhupada's immigration status and what he wanted in his incorporation society. Then one night he came with an attaché case during the lecture and sat in the back with his shirt and tie and slacks.
Now there'll be a recording of that night.
Just try to follow the leadership of Krishna and make an experiment how we are becoming happy. We have just started this association, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and trying to preach the Krishna consciousness. If you kindly come and take advantage of this opportunity, it will be beneficial for both of us. Because we have come here in a mission, and if you cooperate, it will be beneficial.
And Swamiji introduced him into the lecture. He was lecturing about interpretations on the Bhagavad-Gita and how they changed the meaning. And he said, just like our president, he called him, just like our president, Mr. Goldsmith, he's a lawyer, and he knows how lawyers can interpret law. There was a lawyer in Calcutta, and a law was passed by the government, and by his interpretation, he changed the whole thing around, and the government had to make a new law. So we don't want that kind of interpretation. Mr. Goldsmith, would you like to speak? And Mr. Goldsmith said, I should speak now? Swamiji said yes. So he stood up, and that was the end of the lecture. And he came forward and he opened his thin attaché case and pulled out a sheaf of papers. He said, should I get the signatures now? Swamiji said yes.
So the different documents that we're seeing, some of them were the ISKCON incorporation documents, and some of them were the incorporation of the GBC, and some of them were the BBT incorporations. There were several documents.
And I held back, I didn't want to sign. Actually, most of the people who signed were the least committed. And they signed the papers without even reading them. It was technical too. There were trustees for 1 year, and then there was a meeting and they would change for trustees for a second year, and there was a meeting and there were new trustees for a third year. So he gathered all these signatures and put them back in his attaché case. And we got incorporated. And we were now the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And Prabhupada wrote into it, purposes of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And these are concise, philosophical preaching and sadhana points of the meaning of ISKCON. They're printed every month in Back to Godhead magazine, and you can read them there. After he incorporated ISKCON, Hayagriva wrote what he called a prospectus And it was a little pamphlet that he printed, and it was written in language accessible to a Western audience.
We have that downstairs in Prabhupada's house.
Was, and how people could benefit by it. So I really liked it. Swami G approved of it. And I sent a copy to my parents in the mail. Then I phoned them after they had time to read it. And I was shocked to find that they were very upset. This was the first they heard of my involvement with the Swami in ISKCON. I talked to both my mother and father. My father blasphemed Swamiji, called him a cheater, and these Swamis from India, they're good for nothing. And my mother said, "You're a Catholic, you have no business associating with an Indian religious society. We don't want you to do this. If you continue to do this, we'll have nothing to do with you." I couldn't believe my ears. They were ready to disown me for being part of the Swami's movement, and I couldn't bear the insults my father was making toward the Swami. I said, "We're just a peace and love movement. There's nothing wrong with what we're doing." I said, "We're following the same principles as the Catholic Church." "No, you're not." So I hung up. I was angry too, but I was very sad. And I cried a little. And then I went to see the Swami, and I told him that my parents were so angry, they said they'd disown me if I stayed in ISKCON. And I thought he would preach to me about it, but he didn't say much. He just said a few words. But he had a twinkle in his eye. And later he wrote me a letter and said, "I am your eternal father. Your other father is immaterial." So I know it's good if devotees can make peace with their parents after they join Krishna consciousness movement. And Prabhupada likes that. But in my case, he didn't ask me to make peace with my parents. And I thought of myself as Narada Muni, who as a young boy lost his parents and had to take shelter of the sages and the Bhakti-Vedantas. I did want to make peace with my parents, but they stuck to their guns on the disowning. 20 years later, I called my mother on the phone, and she said, "Where have you been?" I said, "All over the world," but I didn't want to hide. I said, "With the Hare Krishna movement." And she said, real blunt, "As long as you're with them, we don't want anything to do with you." And the conversation lasted about 5 minutes. I said, "But I'm your son. When children grow up, they take different paths, but they still remain part of the family." She said, "All right, I understand, but we don't want anything to do with you." So they were so hardcore that there was no chipping away at their hard hearts. I want to talk about the first initiation. It was in August on Janmashtami. There was no permission required, not even from Swamiji. He just announced the principles, and anyone who wanted could get initiated. In other words, he didn't ask me would I like to get initiated. He just put it out there. And he said we should get beads to chant on. He had Tulsi beads, but Tulsi beads weren't available in New York City. So we went to Tandy's bead and crafts shop and got these big red wooden beads. I remember I went alone. I walked 14 blocks up to 14th Street, and I chanted all the way. And I bought my big red beads. And then I tied a knot in between each bead and made a circle of 108 beads with the head beads. And he taught us how to chant on them. Prabhupada had morning meetings in addition to evening meetings. And in the morning meeting, he chanted one round on beads with us. We would have a kirtan in the morning for 20 minutes, and it was a softer kirtan because we didn't want to disturb the tenant upstairs. And he said, "Chant softly." But the cartels were ringing, and the man upstairs was intolerant and irate. And eventually, water started dripping down from the ceiling. And what the man did was he peeled away the caulking from his bathtub. So there was an opening, and he poured water down there, and it dripped through the floor and through the ceiling of the storefront. But we were undaunted. We continued our morning programs. And after the kirtan, Swamiji said, "Chant one round." And he would chant, and we would chant with him. But I'm talking about the initiation. He told us that we would have it on Janmashtami, and he told us how to observe Janmashtami. He wanted us to stay in the storefront all day and fast. He said if we couldn't fast, we could take some fruit out of his refrigerator. But it was really hard staying in that little storefront with nothing to do except chant on our beads. We asked him to come down, and he was flattered to come down and read from his manuscript of Bhagavad-Gita, which he read to us for hours, and that helped our restlessness. Michael Grant's wife, Jan, or his girlfriend at that point, said she had to go home and feed her cats. Swamiji said, "No, stay. We all have to stay in the temple today." She said, "No, I can't." And she rebelled and she went out the door and shut the door behind her. He shook his head. So we understood he really meant business. And we stayed in our places and leaned against the wall and paced and hung out and listened to him read the Bhagavad-Gita. The initiation was in the evening. I heard the boys talking about it, and they took it very casually. They would say to each other, "Are you going to get initiated?" And one would say, "I don't know. Are you going to get initiated?" I thought I might take a chance. So they were very casual about it. I thought I might take a chance. If I have nothing else to do, I might get initiated. But I took it as a very heavy thing. I had been in the Navy for 2 years, and I experienced that as prison. And now for 2 years I was enjoying freedom and independence, living on the Lower East Side by myself. And I was reluctant to give up my freedom and make a lifetime commitment to the Swami. I didn't feel ready to surrender. But in reality, I had already surrendered to him and accepted him as my guru. But I decided to skip the first initiation. So without anyone noticing, toward the evening, I went out the door and I went to my apartment. And there I spent the evening typing his manuscript. So I remained his follower, but I exempted myself from the first initiation. I stayed up typing. The next morning, I went to him with my typing, a big stack of papers. I was a good typist, and if I made a mistake, I corrected it, and I gave him perfect copies. He used to take them, and he wouldn't proofread them, but he looked them over cursorily and say, "Good job." So I gave him this stack of papers. As soon as I knocked on the door, he was alone, and he said, "Oh, hello, Steve. You didn't come to the initiation yesterday." I said, "No, I didn't. I stayed home and typed." He said, "That's all right." And he said, "You have some typing for me?" And I went over and sat beside him and gave him the typing, and he looked at it. And he said, "Good job." And then he reached over and he gave me some grapes, a little handful of grapes. And I took them and I thought to myself, I stayed up all night and all I get is a few grapes. And then the phone rang. He had a phone in his room for a while, until it got intolerable. And he answered it and he spoke a few moments, something about a marriage. Then he hung up and he turned to me and said, "I'm going to hold a wedding tomorrow of 2 of my students. I would like to invite you." And this is just what I needed, personal attention. I craved personal attention and responded to it very much. Swamiji had daily lunches, but then on Sunday, he cooked a special feast and served it in the same place in his room, and he did the cooking. And he cooks sweet rice and halva. He puts panjali rice, yellow with cheese balls. So I didn't think I was invited. I was very careful not to intrude on the Swami. So one Sunday after his morning class, I sat out on the stoop, on the curb rather, of 22nd Avenue, and I was looking down the street and trying to think what I would do today. And he was still in the storefront and he saw me, and he asked the boy to bring me in. I went up to him and he said, "Do you have any work today?" He knew that I was a worker. I said, "No, I have off today." He said, "We have a Sunday feast every Sunday. I'm inviting you to come." And that's what I loved, the personal invitation. So he personally invited me to the wedding also. And then, after being invited to the wedding, he gave me some more stack of papers for typing. And I was about to take my leave. And he said to me, "This taking of typing is not mechanical. It's not automatic. But if you love me, I'll love you." And when he said those words, it had a tremendous effect on me. I was very moved emotionally and deeply personally. I felt so happy. It broke through all my barriers of not wanting to surrender to him. Foolish things, like his being an Indian and his being an old man. And I thought love was a one-way street, that he should love me, but not that I had to love him back. But now he said, "If you love me, I'll love you." And I was so happy. I ran out of that apartment and down the stairs in complete bliss. And I was a changed man. Those words were very important to me. I went to the wedding, and there was a feast. There was a newcomer who came to the feast named Bruce Sharp. And he said that the samosas at the feast convinced him to become a devotee.
Brahmananda.
But I was envious of the initiates. We didn't have bead bags, but we wore our beads around our neck in 2 strands, these big red wooden beads. And they were calling each other by their new Sanskrit names. And I was green with envy. I thought I really had missed out. So as soon as I could, I went to the Swami in his room and I said, "Can I get initiated too?" And he said, "Well, you'll have to be a vegetarian." I said, "I already am. I've been a vegetarian for 6 months." He said, "Yes, you can get initiated. We're having another initiation at an auspicious occasion. In 2 weeks, it's Srimati Radharani's appearance day, and you can get initiated then. There are a couple of others who are ready." So on September 23rd, 1966, on Radhastami, I got initiated. Prabhupada told us a little bit about Srimati Radharani. He said on Krishna's appearance day, we have to fast all day because Krishna is hard and strong. But Radharani is very tender, so we only fast until noon. And then he gave a sutra about Radharani, which to this day I love. He said Radharani is the best devotee of Krishna because she loves him the most. And we had our initiation. There were 3 of us. There was me, there was Keith, who had been incarcerated in Bellevue during the first initiation and couldn't attend. And there was Chuck, Achyutananda, who had taken a vacation from Krishna consciousness during the week of the first initiation and missed it. So the 3 of us got initiated in his apartment, and he built a fire. And he chanted on each of our beads 1 round before giving us our beads, a wonderful custom. And then he asked me to bow down in front of him. So I put my head at his feet, and he said, "Repeat after me." And he repeated his pranam mantra, Namaha, and I said Namaha, and he said Om, I said Om, Vishnu, Vishnu, Pradaya, Pradaya, Krishna, Krishna, Prasaya, Bhutale, Bhutale, Srimate, Bhakti, Bhakti. And when I said the word Bhakti, I had a real emotional response. I felt I was plunging down, down, down into a swoon of devotion at his lotus feet. It was very mystical and sweet. And then I came up, and he gave me my beads. And he gave a lecture. And in the lecture, for the first time, he mentioned Guru Dakshin. It was the first time I heard the word. And he said, when the spiritual master gives you knowledge, you have a debt to pay to him. And what you have to pay back is, you have to tell people about Krishna. And I thought, wow, this is an obligation. I just got initiated, and it means I have to preach about Krishna. So I asked him the next day, what was the meaning of my name? He said, your name means the inner reality of truth. It's a little abstract, but I accepted it. Satsvarupa. One time, shortly after that, I came into his room while others were gathered, and he said, oh, here comes the truth personified. And that made a little more sense. So the others accepted me as having a spiritual name and being initiated. Another thing that happened during that summer was we got an invitation from the United Nations to attend a peace prayer vigil in literatures.
Okay, we'll stop here and we'll catch up next week. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.